The persistent sound of the alarm clock echoed through the spacious, minimalist bedroom. Leah Williams slowly opened her eyes, feeling the weight of the day ahead. She had spent the last few weeks immersed in preparations for the trial that would capture the nation's attention today. Atlanta, a city with a complicated history of racial issues, was on the brink of a judicial decision that could change how systemic racism was addressed in large corporations. Leah sat up in bed, taking a deep breath as her eyes scanned the quiet room. The walls were adorned with awards, photographs, and diplomas reflecting her lifetime achievements, a journey marked by challenges and triumphs. Today, she, a 42-year-old Black woman, was getting ready to preside over one of the most important trials of her career as a federal judge. The significance of this case was not just professional but deeply personal as well. Rising with determination, Leah walked over to the mirror. Her eyes took in the signs of sleepless nights and accumulated tension, but also the strength that had brought her here. She adjusted her hair, observing her features with pride. As she dressed, the sound of the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. It was her legal assistant, Megan, who always came by early to discuss the final details of the trial. "Good morning, Judge Williams," Megan greeted her with a nervous smile, holding a stack of documents. "Are you ready for today?" Leah looked at Megan, seeing the same anxiety she felt. The young assistant had been by her side for 3 years and understood the weight this trial carried. "As ready as I can be," Leah replied in a firm voice, though there was a hint of hesitation. "Today isn't just about the case, Megan. It's about much more than that." Megan nodded, understanding. "What do you think the press will do when all this comes out?" "They're already outside, eager to capture your arrival at the courthouse." Leah sighed, walking towards the window. Outside, the first rays of sunlight began to illuminate the city, and she could imagine the reporters crowded in front of the courthouse, waiting for any statement from her. She knew it was inevitable, but today she wasn't in the mood to deal with cameras and intrusive questions. "I'll go in through the back," Leah declared firmly. "Today, I'm not in the mood to be the center of attention before even entering the courtroom." Megan frowned, a bit worried. "Are you sure? They might see it as an attempt to avoid the press. It might not look good." Leah turned, looking directly at Megan. "I don't care about appearances. What matters is the case. I want to go in and focus on the work I have to do." The young assistant sighed, accepting the decision. "All right, I'll inform the driver. He can stop at the back entrance." Leah thanked her with a nod as Megan hurried out. Alone again, she paused for a moment and looked at herself in the mirror. There she was, about to face another day where her role as a judge would be crucial. But today would be different. Leah knew she wasn't just judging a case. She was representing something bigger. With one last adjustment to her immaculate black suit, Leah grabbed her bag and left the house, ready for the day ahead. She knew the eyes of the nation were on her, but what mattered most was that her own eyes were fixed on the truth. As she got into her car, the driver greeted her with a polite smile. "Good morning, ma'am." "Good morning, John. We're going through the back today, please." The driver nodded and headed towards the courthouse, aware that today would be different for everyone. On the way, Leah looked out the window, observing the bustling streets of Atlanta. She knew that every step she took in that courthouse would reflect years of struggle, not just for herself, but for so many Black people who, like her, had faced structural racism. Today, justice wouldn't just be an abstract concept, it would be a real battle. The car moved smoothly through the streets of Atlanta, and the muffled sound of the tires on the pavement was the only noise inside the vehicle. Leah Williams watched the streets and people through the window. The sky was clear, but she felt the weight of an internal storm. Her thoughts wandered between the important case she was about to preside over and the pressures that came with the position she held. She knew the expectations placed on her. As one of the few Black women to reach such a high position in the judicial system, Leah was acutely aware that every decision she made would be scrutinized, judged, and often misunderstood. But what troubled her most at that moment was the symbolism of this particular trial. She wasn't just ruling on a racial discrimination case in a major corporation. She was fighting against a system that had long oppressed people like her. "We're almost there, ma'am," John, the driver, informed Leah, interrupting her train of thought. She looked ahead, seeing the imposing courthouse building approaching. From a distance, it was already possible to see the presence of cameras, reporters, and a crowd waiting for her arrival. "Thank you, John. Let's go straight to the back entrance," Leah confirmed, her tone calm but resolute. John, who had worked with Leah for years, knew that once she made a decision, she rarely changed her mind. He steered the car down a side street, avoiding the front of the courthouse and the crowds eagerly waiting. The back entrance was less busy, typically used by staff and people who didn't want to draw attention. As the car approached the side door, Leah began to feel the relief of avoiding the media frenzy. She didn't want the press to distract her from the focus of the trial. However, fate had other plans for that day. When the car stopped, Leah stepped out with her impeccable posture, ready to enter the courthouse with minimal fuss. But as soon as she took the first steps toward the back entrance, she was abruptly stopped by a uniformed man. Hey, you can't come in this way," shouted the officer with an authoritative voice. Leah looked at the officer, surprised. He was a white man, burly, around 35 years old, his face marked by the harshness of someone who seemed to enjoy exercising power. Jack Thompson, according to his badge, looked at Leah with disdain, as if she were an intruder. "Sorry, I'm in a hurry. I have an important session in court today," Leah replied firmly, already accustomed to handling uncomfortable situations, but without mentioning who she was. "Session? You? Don't make me laugh. This is a restricted area. You can't enter here," Jack said, crossing his arms and looking her up and down. "Women like you shouldn't be around here anyway. Go to the front, if they even let you in." Leah's heart raced. This type of situation wasn't new to her, but it never stopped hurting. There was something in the way he looked at her, with contempt and presumption, that made her relive every moment of covert or overt racism she had faced in her life. "I said I'm in a hurry," Leah repeated, this time more firmly, refusing to be intimidated. But Jack stepped forward, blocking her path. His face was now even colder, as if he was enjoying this small display of power. "I don't care if you're in a hurry. Go back where you came from. This is not a place for you," he retorted, a sarcastic smile on his face. Before Leah could respond, a deep, familiar voice interrupted the confrontation. "What the hell is going on here?" asked Lieutenant Michael Evans, emerging from a side corridor. Michael, a tall black man with an imposing presence, was a longtime ally of Leah in the fight against racism both inside and outside the system. Jack looked at Michael but didn't back down. "I'm just doing my job, Lieutenant. She was trying to enter where she shouldn't." Michael stepped forward, placing himself between Leah and Jack. "Do you know who you're talking to? This is Judge Leah Williams, the woman presiding over the biggest case you'll ever see. And you're treating her like this?" Jack's face twisted in shock and embarrassment. "Judge? I didn't know." "That's evident," Michael interrupted angrily. "How dare you treat someone with such contempt? Worse still, a federal judge? Do you think you can hide your racism under the guise of authority here?" Jack, visibly disconcerted, stepped back. I didn't mean to." "Save your excuses," Michael said coldly. "You didn't care to know who she was because you saw her skin color and thought that was enough." Leah remained silent, still processing what had happened. Her mind whirled between shock and the need to maintain composure. Finally, she took a deep breath and addressed Jack, her tone controlled but firm. "I suggest you think very carefully about what you did here today, and I hope you're prepared to deal with the consequences." Jack, still speechless, stepped back, avoiding the eyes of Michael and Leah. "Let's go, Leah," Michael said, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You have a courtroom to lead. Let me handle this." Leah nodded, her voice silent. She entered the courthouse, but the tension from the moment still weighed on her. This wouldn't end here, and she knew it. As she walked beside Michael, Leah tried to compose her thoughts. The imposing facade of the courthouse loomed ahead, but the incident with Officer Jack Thompson still echoed in her mind. She knew she needed to focus on the case she was about to preside over, but the racist attack had deeply shaken her. Despite all her accomplishments, she still faced prejudice in the very place where she represented justice. Michael watched her closely as they walked through the quiet corridors leading to the courtroom. He knew Leah well enough to see she was trying to stay calm, but he also saw the burden on her shoulders. "Are you okay?" Michael asked, breaking the silence. Leah sighed before responding, not taking her eyes off the path ahead. "I'm okay, but I'm tired, Michael. Tired of having to prove every day that I belong here. I have years of education, an impeccable career, and yet, a simple uniform is enough for someone like him to feel entitled to treat me like I'm nothing." Michael nodded slowly. He understood, not only as Leah's friend but as a black man who also bore the scars of institutional racism. "I know, Leah, but this won't go unnoticed. He'll have to answer for this." Leah stopped for a moment, turning to him. "And what will that change? Another racist cop being punished? And the next one? How many more? What happened today isn't just about me. This happens every day to black people who don't have the visibility I do. Most of them don't have someone like you to intervene." Michael looked at her with empathy, but also with determination. "You're right, but that's why what you do is so important. Your presence here matters, Leah. You're blazing a trail. We can't fix the whole world at once, but we can start where we are." Leah smiled slightly, appreciating Michael's support but unable to completely shake off the weight of the situation. "Thank you, Michael. I just can't lose focus now. I have a trial to preside over, and that needs to be my priority. We'll deal with Thompson later." Michael nodded. "Of course. Let's focus on the trial. But know I'll be by your side when it's time to face this. He won't go unpunished." Leah took a deep breath, trying to regain her usual composure. The corridor finally opened into the grand hall, leading to the courtroom. She looked around, noticing the low murmur of lawyers and assistants waiting for the trial to begin. The energy in the room was palpable. Everyone knew this would be a crucial day. Before entering, Leah looked at Michael one last time. "Thank you for being out there today. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't shown up." Michael smiled softly. "Whenever you need, Leah. You're not alone in this." Leah took a deep breath and prepared to enter the courtroom. The doors opened, and immediately, everyone in the room stood in respect for her presence. The formality of the scene was familiar, but Leah felt the weight of the day on her shoulders. She walked to her seat with her head held high, determined to put the incident behind her and focus on the trial about to begin. As she settled in, her assistant Megan approached with the case documents. "Everything is ready, Judge Williams," Megan said in a low, professional voice. "The defense and prosecution are waiting for your instructions." Leah nodded, looking at the lawyers at their respective tables. The trial she was about to conduct involved a racial discrimination case within a large tech company where black employees had been systematically denied promotions and received lower salaries than their white colleagues, despite performing the same duties. The case was symbolic, not just for its magnitude, but for the impact it would have on other corporations and the fight for racial equality in the workplace. She opened the documents and looked at the first page, but for a brief moment, her mind went back to what had happened at the back door. What Jack Thompson had done was a reflection of the same racism she was there to fight. Not in a courtroom, but in the streets, in the daily interactions that millions of black people faced. But now wasn't the time to think about that. Leah needed to be present for the people depending on her fair and firm decision. "Let's begin," she said, her clear voice echoing through the room. The trial began with the opening statements, and Leah remained attentive to every word. Over the next few hours, she listened to the witnesses, reviewed the evidence, and immersed herself deeply in the case, seeking justice impartially. But deep down, a voice whispered that outside that courtroom, justice still had a long way to go. Hours had passed since Leah Williams began presiding over the racial discrimination case. The courtroom was silent, except for the voices of the lawyers and witnesses recounting stories of injustice. Leah, seated in her elevated chair, watched every movement and listened to every word intently. In that room, she maintained absolute control. There, no one questioned her authority. She was the final voice, the arbiter of justice, and her judgment could determine the future of many lives. But even with all this responsibility, a part of her mind was still troubled by the incident with Officer Jack Thompson. Leah knew she would have to confront that, but at that moment, she needed to channel all her energy into the case before her. The current witness, Marcus Allen, one of the employees who had sued the company, was on the witness stand. He was a black man in his 30s, with a serious and determined expression. "Mr. Allen, can you tell us about your experience working at the company?" the prosecution's lawyer asked in a solemn tone. Marcus took a deep breath, the nervousness evident in his eyes, but he remained firm. "I worked at that company for 8 years. I started as a developer, and over time, I saw many promotions happen around me. I knew I was qualified, often more so than some white colleagues who were promoted. Yet, I was always told I needed more time, more experience. There was always an excuse." Leah watched closely. She knew that story. It was the same narrative of so many other black people who faced invisible barriers, constantly needing to prove more to get less. "At any point, did you question your superiors about this?" the lawyer continued. "Yes, more than once. They always gave me vague answers, like you need to improve your communication skills, or just a few more months and it will be your turn. But those months never came." Leah looked at the defense, observing their reactions. They maintained a neutral posture, but she knew they would soon come up with arguments to try to downplay what Marcus had experienced. The defense attorney, Patrick Hayes, stood up for his turn to question the witness. He was a middle-aged man, confident and with a solid reputation for defending large corporations. He approached Marcus, adjusting his tie, and asked in a calculated tone, "Mr. Allen, you mentioned that you weren't promoted. However, didn't the company promote other employees with more experience before you? Wasn't that the criterion?" Marcus glanced at Leah briefly before responding. "Yes, some had been there longer, but many hadn't. There were people who joined after me and were already in managerial positions." "And you're saying the only reason you weren't promoted was because of your skin color?" Patrick asked with a slight tone of skepticism. Marcus hesitated for a moment before affirming firmly, "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying." Leah felt the weight of those words. They were simple but carried decades of a national history of exclusion and prejudice. She knew many still considered these experiences as subjective, but the truth was clear to those who lived the reality of systemic racism. As the session progressed, Leah stayed focused on the trial, but her mind occasionally drifted back to the incident with Thompson. Racism wasn't an abstract concept to her. It was present both in the judicial system she represented and on the streets she walked. At the end of the day, after the hearings ended and the trial was adjourned for the next day, Leah retreated to her office. Sitting at her desk, she reflected on the case and the incident. Soon, a knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Leah said in a tired voice. It was Michael. He entered, closing the door behind him. "It's time to deal with that cop," he said bluntly. Leah looked at him, unsurprised. She knew this moment would come. The entire day had been consumed by the trial, but now it was time to address what had happened that morning. "What did you find out?" Leah asked. Michael crossed his arms, his expression serious. "Thompson has a history. Several complaints of abuse of power, some related to racial issues, but nothing ever came of them. He's the type who feels untouchable." Leah nodded. She had expected something like this, but hearing that he had a history made her anger bubble up again. "What do we do now?" "I've already spoken with the police chief," Michael replied. "He's expecting you to file a formal complaint." "Don't worry, Leah. Thompson won't get away with this." Leah sighed. She didn't want that kind of attention, but she knew she couldn't let the incident go without consequences. She had a responsibility, not just as a judge, but as a black woman who needed to fight for justice in all areas of life. "Let's go to the station," Leah said, standing up with determination. "It's time to deal with this once and for all." Michael nodded, grabbing his coat. "I'm with you, Leah. Always." As the two left the office and headed toward the police station, Leah felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. What had happened that morning couldn't be ignored. As a judge, as a woman, as a black person, she knew she needed to fight not only in the courts but also in the streets. And that battle was only beginning. The Atlanta police station was relatively calm that night. The usual traffic of officers coming and going was almost a background noise as Leah and Michael entered the building. The cold, impersonal environment of the station was something Leah rarely had to deal with since her work was primarily in the courtroom. But today, being there was necessary. The injustice she faced that morning couldn't go unpunished. As they walked up to the reception desk, Leah maintained a serious expression, though inside she felt a mix of emotions. She knew that the decision to report Officer Jack Thompson would have repercussions. However, she also knew that if she didn't, she would be perpetuating the same cycle of abuse she fought to break. "Good evening. We're here to see the police chief," Michael said in his usual firm and professional tone as he and Leah approached the receptionist. The woman, an on-duty officer, looked up from her monitor and immediately recognized Michael. "Of course, Lieutenant Evans. He's expecting you," the receptionist replied with a nervous smile upon seeing Leah beside him. Everyone there knew that something big had happened earlier. Leah remained silent, letting Michael handle the initial moments. It didn't take long for Police Chief George Matthews, a man with a stern appearance but a reputation for integrity, to greet them in his office. "Leah, Michael," Matthews said, standing to shake their hands. "Please, have a seat. I've already been briefed on what happened earlier." Leah sat up straight, feeling the weight of expectations in the air. She knew this wasn't just about what Thompson had done to her. It was clear this was a significant case that would draw public attention and possibly shake the department's image. "I don't want this to become a spectacle," Leah began, her voice controlled. "But what happened today was a clear display of abuse of power and racism. I need to ensure it isn't swept under the rug." Matthews nodded, running a hand over his graying beard. "I understand, and let me be clear. Jack Thompson has been a problem. He has several complaints against him, but never anything this serious, and never with someone of your public profile, Leah. I understand the weight this has for you and what it means for the community." Michael, sitting beside Leah, intervened. "The point is, if we don't do something now, he'll continue to abuse his position. That's why we're here. We don't just want Thompson punished. We want a full investigation and transparency in the process." Matthews looked from Michael to Leah, considering the implications of what they were asking. He knew he couldn't simply ignore what had happened, but he also understood that launching an open investigation against one of his officers could cause a political and public storm. "I agree with you. Thompson needs to be held accountable. I'll initiate the suspension process immediately, and he will be thoroughly investigated. I want you to know I'll take this very seriously," Matthews said with a resolute tone. Leah nodded, relieved but also aware that this was only the first step in a long process. "Thank you, Chief Matthews. This isn't just about me, as you know. The issue is much larger than this isolated incident. It's a reflection of something that happens every day to thousands of people who don't have a voice. I can't and won't let this go." Matthews watched her intently. He knew Leah wasn't the type to settle for half measures. "I understand, Leah. You have my full support on this. I don't want our department to condone this kind of behavior, and I will ensure that protocol is strictly followed. Thompson will be investigated, and if what you're saying is confirmed, which, frankly, already seems clear to me, he will be permanently removed." Leah looked at Michael, who gave a slight nod, indicating that this was the best course for now. "Then we'll do that," Leah said firmly. "And if there's any attempt to cover this up or protect Thompson, I will make sure the public knows what's going on." Matthews, though accustomed to high-pressure situations, knew this was a line he shouldn't cross. Leah's influence in the community and her reputation as a fair judge were things he respected and feared. He needed to handle this correctly, not just for her but to maintain trust in the department. "It won't come to that. I guarantee it," he said, looking Leah straight in the eyes. "Very well," Leah replied, standing up. "Let's file the formal complaint and let justice take its course." With the situation formally recorded, Leah and Michael left the police chief's office. As they walked out of the station, the night air felt cooler, but Leah knew the battle was just beginning. "Do you think he'll really follow through with this?" Leah asked Michael as they descended the steps of the station. "Matthews is a fair man. He will investigate, but we need to stay vigilant. Any sign that they're trying to downplay this, and we won't hesitate to take it further." Leah nodded, silent for a moment before murmuring, "I never imagined that after all this time, I'd still be facing situations like this. It feels like the more we progress, the harder they try to pull us back." Michael, always her rock, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're right, but that's how we know we're making a difference. If we weren't provoking change, there wouldn't be so much resistance. Leah smiled slightly, acknowledging the truth in Michael's words. She knew that the fight for equality, for true justice, was a marathon, not a sprint. There were days like this one, where exhaustion and frustration built up, but there were also days when small victories marked significant steps toward a better future. And she would keep fighting, with the same strength that had brought her to that courtroom and now to that police station. The morning after filing the complaint against Officer Jack Thompson, the courthouse was abuzz. News of the incident had spread quickly, and despite Leah's efforts to keep things discreet, it wasn't long before journalists and media outlets started reporting the story. Leah wasn't just a judge. She was a respected public figure, especially in Atlanta, and the fact that she had been a victim of racism soon became headline news. Upon arriving at the courthouse, Leah noticed that something was different. The usual atmosphere of lawyers and staff quietly conversing had been replaced by a frenzy of reporters crowded around the main entrance. Microphones were pointed in her direction as she stepped out of the car, and cameras captured her every move. Michael, already at her side, murmured, "I figured this would happen. Do you want me to handle them?" Leah looked at the reporters, waiting eagerly for a statement. "No, Michael. I'll speak to them." Before Michael could protest, Leah was already walking towards the journalists. She knew she couldn't avoid this situation forever. Maybe it was even better for the case to gain visibility, to ensure the issue wasn't swept under the rug. One of the reporters, a young man from a local channel, was the first to approach, speaking loudly to be heard over the commotion. "Judge Williams, can you tell us about the incident yesterday? Were you really a victim of racism by an Atlanta police officer?" Leah took a deep breath, staying calm. She had spent the previous night thinking about how to handle this. She didn't intend to create a spectacle, but she also wouldn't let the injustice go unnoticed. "Yes," Leah began, her voice firm but controlled. "Yesterday, while entering the back doors of the courthouse, I was confronted by a police officer who treated me disrespectfully and prejudicially because of the color of my skin. We have filed a formal complaint, and the case is being investigated by the police department." Other reporters started shouting questions all at once, but Leah raised her hand, asking for calm. "I want to make it clear that this isn't just about me. What happened yesterday is part of a reality that millions of Black people face every day. I'm fortunate to be in a position of power, to have resources and allies to support me. But many people aren't as lucky. Institutional racism is real, and we need to fight it on all fronts, in the justice system, in the streets, in our institutions." There was a momentary silence as Leah's words hung in the air. Michael, standing beside her, smiled slightly, proud of her composure in the face of the situation. Another reporter asked, "Do you think this incident could impact the case you're presiding over, which also deals with issues of racism?" Leah paused before answering. "This incident will not impact the trial I'm overseeing. As a judge, I'm trained to be impartial and fair, and that doesn't change because of my personal experiences. However, it's impossible to ignore that these two events are connected by a larger issue, the fight for racial justice and equality." With that, Leah concluded the brief interview, signaling to Michael that they should head into the courthouse. The attention from the journalists, though unwanted, also carried an opportunity. The chance to shed more light on the issue of racism that still persisted in many spheres of society. "You were brilliant," Michael said as they walked away from the reporters. Leah shook her head, still thinking about the words she had just spoken. "I don't want this to detract from the case I'm judging, but at the same time, I can't hide from the truth. What happened to me is part of the same system that harms so many others. I need to speak for those who don't have a voice." "You're doing that," Michael replied, "and you're not alone. Thompson will pay for what he did. And the fact that this has come to light will only put more pressure on the department to act quickly." Leah took a deep breath as they entered the courthouse. The reality was that the pressure on her was increasing. It wasn't just the case she was presiding over, which already had significant social and political implications, but now there was also public expectation about how she would handle the incident involving Thompson. She knew that every decision she made would be scrutinized closely. Inside the courthouse, her assistant, Megan, greeted her with a worried expression. "Judge, the courtroom is packed. The media is following the case even more closely after what happened yesterday." There are lawyers and observers waiting for a comment from you about the incident. Leah sighed but maintained her firm stance. They won't distract the court. The trial will proceed as planned, and the focus will remain solely on the case we're handling. Megan nodded, but before leaving, she looked at Leah with empathetic eyes. I'm sorry about what happened, Judge. Everyone here knows it wasn't fair. Leah smiled slightly, appreciating the kindness. Thank you, Megan. But justice is what we're striving for, both in this courtroom and out there. As she entered the courtroom, Leah noticed the increased number of people present. The racial discrimination case against the tech company was now seen in a new light, with the incident involving Leah inevitably linked to the trial. But Leah wouldn't let the crowd's emotions or external pressure interfere with her impartiality. She took her usual seat and began the day, conducting the trial with the same skill and seriousness she always demonstrated. However, she knew that outside that room, a storm was brewing. The next few days would be crucial. The days following the incident with Officer Jack Thompson were intense. The pressure on Leah didn't let up. Inside the courtroom, she remained focused, handling the racial discrimination case with the same seriousness and impartiality as always. But outside the hearings, media attention and support from Atlanta's Black community only grew. Leah had become a reluctant symbol of the fight against systemic racism. On the morning of the fourth day of the trial, Leah arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual, trying to avoid the crowd of journalists now camped at the door. Michael, as always, was by her side, alert for any sign of trouble. As they entered her assistant's office, Leah found Megan standing, holding an envelope with a worried expression. Judge, this came for you early this morning, Megan said, extending the envelope. It's not usual for you to receive mail directly like this. Security already checked it, but I thought you should see it. Leah took the envelope and carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, with messy handwriting and some words underlined. As she read, Leah quickly realized it was a veiled threat. The letter contained phrases like, "You're stirring up a hornet's nest, Judge. Be careful what you wish for." She let out a deep sigh, folding the letter and placing it on the desk. "It seems this case is bothering more people than we thought," Leah commented, her voice firm but with a touch of weariness. Michael, who had been watching closely, picked up the letter and read it quickly. His face hardened. "This is unacceptable, Leah. We need to increase your security. I'll take care of it." "I don't want to turn this into a security circus," Leah replied, shaking her head. "There's already too much attention on this case. Any sign of fear will only empower those trying to intimidate me." "This isn't about fear, Leah," Michael said, looking her directly in the eyes. "It's about protecting you. These threats are real, and we can't ignore them." Leah knew he was right. Despite her strong stance, she felt the weight of everything happening. The tension was growing, and the line between her personal life and the case she was presiding over seemed to blur more each day. "Okay," Leah finally conceded, "but nothing extravagant. I don't want this to affect the trial proceedings." Megan, who had been watching the exchange with visible concern, intervened. "Judge, you know everyone here at the courthouse is with you, right? We're doing everything we can to ensure nothing interferes with your work. But this case, it's bigger than all of us. You don't have to face it alone." Leah gave Megan a small, grateful smile. The solidarity from her colleagues and friends was what kept her strong in the face of so many adversities. "I know, Megan. Thank you for everything. Let's just keep doing our jobs because that's what they don't expect. Let's show that the system can work fairly, even under pressure." The court session began promptly, as usual. The racial discrimination case against the tech company, which had previously garnered only modest attention, now had a much larger audience. The media scrutinized every detail of the trial, and the public watched, divided in their opinions about what was at stake. As Marcus Allen, the key witness, continued his testimony, Leah sensed something different that morning. There was an invisible tension in the air, something beyond the usual nervousness of a significant trial. The defense, led by attorney Patrick Hayes, seemed more aggressive than ever. At one point, he stood up and, in a sharp tone, addressed the witness. "Mr. Allen, with all due respect, don't you think your perceptions might be distorted by the current sensitivity around racial issues?" There is no concrete evidence that you were discriminated against because you're black, just your word. Marcus frowned but maintained his composure. I lived through it, Mr. Hayes. It's not a matter of perception. Everyone who works with me knows how I was overlooked. It's not just about what I feel. It's about what actually happened. Leah watched closely, knowing that this kind of argument was a common tactic in discrimination cases, trying to reduce the real experiences of victims to mere feelings or misunderstandings. She needed to ensure the defense didn't divert the focus of the case. Mr. Hayes, Leah interrupted, her firm voice echoing through the room. This court is here to consider the evidence presented and the facts witnessed. We will not reduce Mr. Allen's experiences to subjective perceptions. Continue with your cross-examination, but keep it relevant. Patrick quickly composed himself, nodding in acknowledgement. Of course, Your Honor. The trial continued, but Leah knew it wouldn't be easy. The tensions outside the courtroom were starting to seep into the proceedings. Every detail of the case was being meticulously analyzed by the media and public opinion. The incident with Thompson had heightened emotions, and Leah found herself at the center of a battle that extended beyond this particular case. After several more hours of testimonies and discussions, Leah adjourned the session, scheduling the continuation for the next day. As the courtroom emptied, Michael approached her again, this time with a serious expression. "Did you notice the activity outside?" he asked quietly, trying not to alarm anyone. Leah nodded. "Yes, things are getting more intense. Not just in the courtroom. The pressure from outside is palpable. It feels like every move I make is being judged. This is part of the fight, Leah. They're scared. When you challenge a system that's been in place for so long, there's resistance. But it also means we're doing the right thing." Leah gave a slight smile, but the exhaustion was evident on her face. "I just hope this fight is worth it. It feels like we're racing against time to keep things under control." Michael put his hand on her shoulder, as he always did when he wanted to offer comfort. "It will be worth it. You know that. And no matter what happens, you've already done more than most would ever dare to do." Leah nodded, but she knew the challenges were just beginning. The trial had a long way to go, and outside the courthouse walls, a bigger battle was being waged. The pursuit of justice, both inside and outside the courtroom, would demand everything from Leah. The next morning, Leah woke up feeling the weight of the past few weeks on her shoulders. The trial, the incident with Officer Thompson, the threats, everything seemed to be piling up. She was exhausted, but she knew she couldn't back down now. There was a bigger fight that depended on her determination, and justice needed to prevail. When she arrived at the courthouse, Leah was met by Michael, who was more serious than usual. As they walked through the courthouse corridors, he broke the silence. "Leah, we need to talk about Thompson. The police department isn't acting as quickly as I'd hoped. They're trying to downplay the severity of the situation." Leah paused for a moment and looked at Michael, her eyes reflecting fatigue and frustration. "They're trying to cover it up, like they always do. I've seen this before, Michael. That's why we can't trust the system to work on its own. We need to keep up the pressure." Michael nodded, but something in his expression indicated there was more to the situation. "It's not just that," he said, taking a deep breath before continuing. "There's a rumor that Thompson has some important allies within the police force. Some of his colleagues are lobbying to keep him from facing real consequences. They see him as one of the good guys, even after what he did." Leah closed her eyes for a moment, trying to contain her growing anger. Thompson's impunity was a reflection of a broken system that protected its own while marginalizing the victims. "Of course they are," she replied, her voice colder than usual. "But we're not going to let that happen. We have to keep pushing forward. If justice isn't served within the police department, we'll take it outside. The media is already watching, and the community is demanding answers." They continued walking to the courtroom, where Leah prepared for another day of trial. As she entered the room, she felt a wave of tension. The room was full, not just of journalists and observers, but also of community members, many of them clearly there in solidarity with Leah and the fight she represented. Marcus Allen was in the witness chair, ready to continue his testimony. He was visibly nervous but determined. When Leah entered the room, he greeted her with a brief nod, a gesture of respect that Leah returned. The session began with the defense resuming the cross-examination of Marcus. Patrick Hayes, the company's attorney, seemed to have changed his strategy. He was less aggressive, but still trying to discredit the discrimination narrative. "Mr. Allen," Hayes said, walking slowly around the room, "you mentioned earlier that you were passed over for a promotion because of your race. But at any point, did anyone from the company explicitly tell you that was the reason?" Marcus hesitated for a second, but then responded firmly. No one said it directly. But you don't need someone to yell, "You weren't promoted because you're black." Actions speak louder. When you see your less qualified white colleagues advancing while you're left behind repeatedly, it becomes clear. Hayes smiled slightly, as if he had expected this response. "So, what you're suggesting is that this entire issue is based on your assumptions about the company's intentions." Leah intervened before Marcus could respond. "Mr. Hayes, let's stick to the facts presented. This court is here to evaluate the evidence, not to question the perceptions of victims of racism." Hayes nodded, seemingly indifferent to Leah's intervention. But Leah knew he was subtly trying to undermine Marcus's testimony, attempting to paint the case as a matter of misunderstandings or exaggerations. This was not new to her. Racism, especially in the corporate environment, was often so insidious that its victims were forced to prove the obvious. The trial continued, but Leah knew it wouldn't be easy. The tensions outside the courtroom were starting to seep into the proceedings. Every detail of the case was being meticulously analyzed by the media and public opinion. The incident with Thompson had heightened emotions, and Leah found herself at the center of a battle that extended beyond this particular case. After several more hours of testimonies and discussions, Leah adjourned the session, scheduling the continuation for the next day. As the courtroom emptied, Michael approached her again, this time with a serious expression. "Did you notice the activity outside?" he asked quietly, trying not to alarm anyone. Leah nodded. "Yes, things are getting more intense. Not just in the courtroom. The pressure from outside is palpable. It feels like every move I make is being judged." The testimony continued, but Leah noticed something strange. The atmosphere in the room felt heavier than usual, as if something was about to happen. Megan, her assistant, hurried in and whispered something to Leah. "Judge, you need to know. Thompson is here. He's been summoned by the police chief to give a statement, but he's hanging around the courthouse." Leah felt her heart race for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Jack Thompson shouldn't be there, especially considering a formal complaint had been filed against him. However, the fact that he appeared without being properly removed demonstrated how much the system still protected him. "Very well," Leah said calmly to Megan. "Let's finish the session without any issues. We'll deal with it afterward." The hours passed slowly, but the tension did not dissipate. When the session was adjourned for a break, Leah and Michael met in her office. Michael seemed more worried than ever. "Are you okay?" he asked, looking at her intensely. "Knowing Thompson is around, that can't be a good sign." Leah nodded. "I'm fine, Michael, but I'm starting to wonder how much longer we can keep this up without something bigger happening." "He's provoking, Leah. We know that. He's trying to intimidate you, but it won't work. You have a lot of support here, and he will be held accountable sooner or later." Leah took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. There was a battle ahead, not just in the courtroom, but outside of it as well. Thompson was a reminder that justice was not always swift, and those who represented institutional power were not always willing to answer for their mistakes. "I know, Michael, and I will keep doing what needs to be done. We'll deal with Thompson after this session ends. But I need Marcus's case to continue without distractions. This is bigger than any of us." Michael smiled, despite the worry etched on his face. "And that's why you're the right person to lead this. You don't back down, and that's what makes the difference." Leah gave a slight smile, but her expression quickly turned serious again. "Let's move forward. Thompson will have to wait. Today, the focus is the courtroom. Justice cannot stop." With this determination, Leah prepared to return to the courtroom. She knew that while Marcus's case was of utmost importance, there was a storm brewing around her, and she would need all her strength to face it. After the break, Leah returned to the courtroom feeling the pressure mounting around her. The trial of Marcus Allen was just the tip of the iceberg, and she knew it. But at that moment, all that mattered was doing her job, letting justice take its course. She adjusted her robe and looked around the courtroom. The crowd seemed larger, and there was a murmur of unease that was uncommon in trials of this nature. Leah watched as Patrick Hayes stood to continue his cross-examination. He walked slowly up to Marcus, his tone controlled. "Mr. Allen," Hayes began, with his usual air of false cordiality, "you mentioned that you were passed over for promotions several times at the company and that you believe this was due to your race. But, upon reviewing your performance history, we noticed some weaknesses. Do you acknowledge that there were times when your performance was below expectations?" Marcus, clearly exasperated, took a deep breath before responding. "Like any employee, I had moments of difficulty, but I consistently received positive evaluations up to a certain point. When it came time for promotion, the justifications changed. The problem wasn't my performance, but how the company viewed me. I am the only black person in my department. I think that says a lot." Hayes nodded, feigning compassion. "Mr. Allen, could it be that the issue is more complex than that? The fact that you're the only black person in the company could be coincidental, not evidence of discrimination. Perhaps your perception is somewhat distorted by the emotions involved." Leah interrupted before Marcus could respond. "Mr. Hayes, it is not for this court to judge the emotional perceptions of a victim. We are here to examine the evidence of discrimination. Focus on that." Hayes nodded, seemingly indifferent to Leah's intervention. But Leah knew he was subtly trying to undermine Marcus's testimony, attempting to paint the case as a matter of misunderstandings or exaggerations. This was not new to her. Racism, especially in the corporate environment, was often so insidious that its victims were forced to prove the obvious. The trial continued, but Leah knew it wouldn't be easy. The tensions outside the courtroom were starting to seep into the proceedings. Every detail of the case was being meticulously analyzed by the media and public opinion. The incident with Thompson had heightened emotions, and Leah found herself at the center of a battle that extended beyond this particular case. After several more hours of testimonies and discussions, Leah adjourned the session, scheduling the continuation for the next day. As the courtroom emptied, Michael approached her again, this time with a serious expression. "Did you notice the activity outside?" he asked quietly, trying not to alarm anyone. Leah nodded. "Yes, things are getting more intense. Not just in the courtroom. The pressure from outside is palpable. It feels like every move I make is being judged." Hayes paused, clearly uncomfortable with Leah's intervention, but soon resumed his questioning, staying within the bounds she had set. As Marcus's testimony continued, Leah found her mind wandering back to what Megan had said about Jack Thompson. Thompson's presence around the courthouse was no mere coincidence. He was there to send a message of intimidation, and Leah knew that the fight against him was just beginning. When the session was adjourned for the day, Leah gathered her papers and was preparing to leave the courthouse when she saw Michael approaching with a serious expression. "Leah, we have a problem," he said in a low voice to avoid drawing attention. Leah stopped, instantly alert. "What happened now?" "Thompson," Michael replied, casting a worried glance around. "He's moving around too much. We just learned that he has support within the police union. They're campaigning to protect him, claiming that he acted within safety protocols and that there was no misconduct." Leah felt a deep anger boiling inside her. She knew it wouldn't be easy to hold Thompson accountable, but the speed with which he had garnered support within the system was unsettling. The systemic racism she was fighting to dismantle was showing its ugliest face, right in front of her. "This is ridiculous," Leah said, clenching her fists. "He humiliated me, and now he's trying to use the system to shield himself. We can't let this happen, Michael. We have to act." Michael nodded, crossing his arms, clearly frustrated as well. "I know. We're already in touch with the press, and the community is mobilizing. They won't let this slide. But Leah, you need to be prepared. This could drag on, and they'll do everything they can to discredit you." Leah took a deep breath, staying calm, but her gaze was focused and determined. "They can try," she said, her voice full of resolve, "but I'm not going to be silenced. If they think they can intimidate a judge, they're about to find out they're wrong." Michael smiled, admiring Leah's strength, but he knew this battle would be tough, perhaps even tougher than the trial she was presiding over. When they finally left the courthouse, Leah and Michael decided to go to the police station to formally file the complaint against Thompson. They knew this was the next step, and that regardless of Thompson's influence, the law was on their side. At the station, they were greeted by the local police captain, James Whitman, a middle-aged man with a serious but fair demeanor. Whitman had been informed about the situation and seemed willing to cooperate. Judge Roberts, Lieutenant Carter. Whitman greeted them with a nod. "I've been briefed on the incident. We're here to hear your account and ensure that the process is handled properly." Leah, still resentful about what had happened, calmly explained the situation. As she described Thompson's approach, how he treated her, and his refusal to acknowledge who she was, Whitman listened attentively, taking notes. "This is unacceptable," Whitman said when Leah finished. "Thompson will be called in to testify, and we will take this complaint seriously. However," he added with noticeable hesitation, "I must be honest with you. There is a lot of resistance within the department. Thompson has many supporters, and this could complicate things." Leah crossed her arms and looked directly at Whitman, with a serious expression. "Captain, all I ask is that the protocol be followed. If the justice system can be manipulated to protect someone like Thompson, then perhaps it's time to question what kind of justice we're really providing to society." Whitman nodded, clearly respecting Leah's stance. "I agree, Judge, and I can assure you that, at least on my end, we will do everything possible to ensure this process is fair." After filing the report, Leah and Michael left the station. Outside, night had fallen, and the cool Atlanta air felt heavier than ever. They knew they were only at the beginning of a long and exhausting battle. "Now we wait," Michael said, walking beside Leah, "but that doesn't mean we'll sit idly by. We'll keep pushing, taking this to the media and the community. We won't let him escape." Leah looked out at the horizon, where the city lights gleamed. She knew she was in a privileged position, but that also made her a target. What had happened with Thompson was just a reflection of a much larger problem, and she was determined to confront it, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced by the system. "They're not going to silence me," Leah said, her voice low but filled with conviction. "This is just another battle, and I'm ready to win." As they headed home that night, Leah felt that the real trial was not Marcus Allen's or Jack Thompson's. It was the trial of an entire society, of a system that had long turned a blind eye to racial injustice. The sun rose over Atlanta, bringing with it a wave of pressure. The Marcus Allen trial was in the spotlight, and the situation with Jack Thompson was escalating, more intensely than ever. Leah was determined to stay focused, but the fight was far from straightforward. The next morning, as Leah prepared for another day in court, she received an urgent message from Megan. Megan was in Leah's office, her face saying more than her words could express. "Judge, we have a serious problem," Megan began, her voice heavy with tension. "We just received an anonymous tip that someone is trying to bribe witnesses in the Marcus Allen case. It seems there's a coordinated effort to influence the outcome." Leah frowned, her heart racing at the news. "Bribery? That's a new level of desperation," she replied, anger evident in her tone. "Who's behind this? And how do we find out?" Megan handed Leah a copy of the tip. It was an anonymous report, but we've managed to trace some information pointing to suspicious contacts within the involved company. We're investigating. Leah glanced at the document, which clearly indicated an attempt at manipulation. The fact that this was happening was not just a matter of ethics, but a direct violation of the law. The company was desperate to avoid accountability. "We need to act quickly," Leah said, resolute. "If they're trying to bribe witnesses, it means they have a lot to lose. We need to expose this before they can do more damage." As Leah and Megan discussed the best way to handle the situation, Michael entered the office, his expression concerned. "I heard about the bribery," Michael said. "This is serious. What can we do to ensure the trial proceeds without further obstructions?" "We need to bolster witness protection and file a formal complaint with the court," Leah replied. "I'll meet with the Attorney General to discuss this. We need to ensure that these attempts at manipulation are documented and that justice prevails." Attorney General Evelyn Parker was a highly respected figure in the legal system and was willing to help. Leah met with her in her office, where Evelyn greeted her with a serious look. "Judge Roberts," Evelyn said, gesturing to a chair in front of her. "What do we have here?" "Megan informed me about the bribery attempt." Leah sat down and handed Evelyn the documents. "Yes, we received an anonymous tip. The bribery attempt is directly linked to the technology company being tried. This is a clear attempt to interfere with the process." Evelyn examined the documents carefully. "This is more than concerning. We'll need solid evidence to ensure that any attempt at manipulation is punished. The first thing we'll do is protect the witnesses and maintain the integrity of the process." Leah nodded, relieved by Evelyn's swift response. "Great. And please keep this confidential. We can't let these individuals know that we're one step ahead of them." The meeting with Evelyn was productive. Additional security measures were put in place to protect the witnesses and ensure a fair process. Leah knew the coming weeks would be critical, and any slip-up could jeopardize the case. That afternoon, the court was in session again. Leah was preparing to resume Marcus Allen's trial when she noticed the growing tension in the room. The presence of journalists and observers was palpable, and the movements within the courtroom seemed more hurried than usual. During the session, Leah found the defense trying to use the bribery as an attempt to discredit the witness. Patrick Hayes was determined to use any argument available to shift the focus. "Mr. Allen," Hayes began, his tone provocative, "there are rumors that you may have been approached with financial offers to alter your testimony. Don't you think that could tarnish your credibility?" Marcus looked at Hayes with a defiant stare. "I'm not a man who sells his integrity. These rumors are just an attempt to divert attention from the real issue here, which is racial discrimination." Leah intervened before Hayes could continue. "Mr. Hayes, I must remind you that any attempt to question a witness's credibility based on rumors or speculation is unacceptable. We are here to review the evidence presented, not to get lost in distractions." Leah's intervention helped keep the focus on the case, but she knew the battle was far from over. The company involved was doing everything it could to undermine the process and distract from the racial discrimination being discussed. After the session, Leah and Michael met again to discuss the next steps. Michael was in touch with the media and working to keep the case in the public eye. "Leah, things are getting more complicated," Michael said, looking at her with a worried expression. "The pressure is mounting, and there are many trying to use the situation to their advantage. We need to ensure that the truth prevails, no matter what." Leah took a deep breath and looked directly at Michael. "I know, Michael, and that's exactly why we can't give up. Justice isn't just about what happens inside the courtroom. It's about what we do with the truth and how we fight to have it heard." Michael nodded, clearly respecting Leah's determination. "I'll continue to keep the media and public informed, and I'll make sure you have all the support you need to face this battle." With the decision to stay focused on the truth and justice, Leah went home that night. She knew the road ahead would be tough, but she was ready to face any obstacle to ensure that justice was served. The fight was just beginning, and Leah was prepared to face whatever came next. The heat in Atlanta was relentless, reflecting the growing tension around the courthouse and the legal battle Leah Roberts was facing. The week had been marked by more attempts at manipulation and intense pressure, but Leah was determined to stay the course. She knew the truth was on her side, and the fight was worth it. On the morning of a new day in court, Leah entered the courtroom with a resolute expression. The Marcus Allen trial was nearing its final phase, and the case had attracted even more media attention. It was a reflection of the growing public outcry for justice, and Leah knew she couldn't let the pressure divert her from her goal. As she prepared for the session, Leah was approached by Michael, who looked anxious. "Leah, we need to talk," Michael said, his tone grave. "We have new information about the bribery attempt. We've managed to track down one of the intermediaries involved." Leah looked at Michael, intrigued. "Really? What have we found out?" "The intermediary is a former employee of the tech company that was recently fired," Michael explained. "He's been identified as someone who received significant payments over the past few months. We're going to call him in to testify, but we need a plan to make sure he doesn't disappear before then." Leah nodded, understanding the importance of the new information. "We need to act fast. If he's willing to cooperate, this could open a significant breach to expose the corruption within the company." Michael nodded and stepped away to coordinate the subpoena for the intermediary. Leah, meanwhile, prepared to face the courtroom once more. In the session, Leah faced Patrick Hayes, who seemed increasingly desperate. Hayes was trying hard to discredit Marcus and divert attention from the bribery, but Leah was attentive to every move. "Mr. Allen," Hayes said, his voice dripping with disdain, "you claim that the company discriminated against you based on your race, but considering the documents we've presented, there's no clear evidence that the discrimination was intentional. Don't you think these allegations are a bit exaggerated?" Marcus, visibly tired, maintained his composure. "I'm not exaggerating. What's happening here is a reflection of a deeper issue. Discrimination doesn't have to be explicit to be real. It's the way systems and structures are set up to keep certain people at a disadvantage." Leah watched closely, ready to intervene if necessary. Hayes' attempt to deflect focus was becoming increasingly transparent. "Mr. Hayes, trying to divert attention from the case and discredit the witness won't change the facts presented," Leah said firmly. "Let's keep our focus on the evidence and what's really at stake here." When the session broke for a recess, Leah headed to her office, where Megan was waiting with news. "Judge," Megan began. Her face lit up with a mix of concern and relief. "We've located the intermediary. He's willing to cooperate and testify, but we need to ensure his safety. They've already tried to intimidate him." Leah frowned. "We need to make sure he's secure. What he has to say could be crucial to the case. We can't let fear make him back down." That afternoon, the intermediary, Derek Hughes, was brought to court to testify. He looked visibly nervous but determined. Leah watched as he took the witness stand. "Derek," Leah said encouragingly, "I know this isn't easy. Just tell the truth and everything you know. The court is here to hear what you have to say." Derek took a deep breath and began recounting the details of the bribery attempt. He described how he had been approached by the company to influence witness testimonies and how he had received substantial payments to stay silent. "I was instructed to offer money to several people," Derek explained, his voice trembling. "They wanted to make sure the truth didn't come out in court. I was scared, but now I know I need to do what's right." Derek's revelation was a significant blow to the defense. Hayes tried to shift attention, but Leah and the prosecution kept their focus on the evidence. When the session ended, Leah met with Michael in her office, both clearly exhausted but satisfied with the progress. "Derek was brave," Michael commented. Looking at Leah, "He put the company in a tough spot, and with the additional evidence, this should help strengthen our case." Leah agreed, but her expression was more serious. "Yes, but we still have a lot to do. The company won't give up easily, and we need to ensure that the truth prevails without further obstruction." As night fell, Leah knew they were at a crucial point in the case. The battle was far from over, but the progress made with Derek Hughes' cooperation was an important step. Leah was determined to press on and ensure justice was served, no matter the cost. She looked out of her office window, the city lights reflecting her resolve. A storm was brewing, but Leah was ready to face it. The fight for truth and justice was in full swing, and Leah was at the heart of it, with a clear goal: to ensure that justice prevailed. The trial of Marcus Allen was reaching its final stretch. The tension was palpable throughout the courthouse, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Leah Roberts had faced enormous challenges, but the truth was emerging, bringing with it the hope for justice. On the morning before the verdict, Leah was in her office reviewing the final details of the case when Megan entered, bringing a look of relief. "Judge, we have an important update," Megan said with a smile. "The media is covering the case extensively, and the public is becoming more engaged. This has helped keep the pressure on the company." Leah nodded, her gaze fixed on the documents in front of her. "That's great, Megan, but we still need to ensure there are no further sabotage attempts. Witness security remains a priority." Megan agreed and left the office to continue coordinating security measures. Leah prepared for what promised to be a decisive day. In court, Patrick Hayes gave his closing arguments, trying to shift the blame away from the company and discredit Marcus Allen's case. Hayes pulled out every trick he could, but Leah didn't let him divert the focus. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Hayes began in a persuasive tone, "the case against the company is not supported by concrete evidence. The claims of discrimination are based on personal perceptions rather than solid facts." Leah watched intently as Hayes continued his argument. It was clear he was desperate to salvage the company's reputation, but the truth could not be ignored. When it was Leah's turn for her closing arguments, she stood up and addressed the jury with a determination that resonated in every word. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Leah began, "what we're dealing with here is not just a workplace discrimination case. We're facing a systematic attempt to cover up the truth and manipulate justice. Marcus Allen's testimony and the evidence presented have shown that discrimination is not a mere isolated incident, but a practice that reflects a much deeper issue." Leah paused to let her words sink in. Derek Hughes, a man who had the courage to expose corruption, and the evidence he brought to light are a testament to the truth the company tried to hide. Justice must prevail, and you have the responsibility to ensure that it does. Don't let intimidation and the power of a large corporation prevent justice from being served. The jurors listened attentively as Leah concluded her argument. She felt confident she had presented her case clearly and compellingly. The final verdict was announced the following afternoon. The courtroom was filled with spectators, and the air was thick with anticipation. Leah stood with Michael and Megan, both visibly nervous, waiting for the decision. The judge read the verdict, and the courtroom fell into an absolute silence. "We, the jury, find the technology company guilty of racial discrimination against Marcus Allen," the judge announced. A collective sigh of relief and celebration swept through the room. Marcus Allen, with tears in his eyes, received the verdict with a mix of joy and relief. Leah and Michael exchanged a look of satisfaction, knowing they had achieved a major victory. When the courtroom was cleared, Leah was approached by Marcus and his family. "Judge Roberts," Marcus said with a grateful smile, "thank you for fighting for us. This verdict means a lot to me and to everyone who has been through this." Leah smiled, touched by the gratitude. "Marcus, the fight for justice isn't easy, but it's what we need to do. I'm glad we were able to achieve a positive outcome." Later, Leah and Michael met at a nearby cafe to discuss the case and reflect on the victory. "It was a tough battle," Michael said, raising his glass in a toast, "but we made it. The truth prevailed, and justice was served." Leah raised her glass to toast as well. "Yes, we did. And despite the challenges, it reminds us why we fight. There's still much work to be done, but today, we can celebrate this victory." As they celebrated, Leah knew the fight for racial justice was far from over. But at that moment, she allowed herself a moment of rest and celebration. She had proven to herself and to others that justice still had strength, and she was ready to continue fighting for a fairer future for everyone. Atlanta continued its routine, but for Leah, it was a day to remember that truth and justice, though often challenged, could still prevail against the forces trying to silence them. With a renewed heart and strengthened determination, Leah was ready to face the next challenges, knowing that as long as there was courage and commitment, the fight for justice would never be in vain.